Now let's add the category information to the index and details product views, the read-only views for products. This is where the fact that we're not using the product entity itself for our views will start to reap some benefits. Recall that we're using the product model class here, and this class is geared entirely at supporting the different views we have related to products. We're going to want to show the category name here on the listing view, so let's go make the changes we need on the product model. We can fix the null warnings we're getting here with that equal null bang syntax first, and then underneath the isActive property, I'll paste in two new properties, category ID and category name, and I'll set the display name of the category name property to simply category. Next, we can update the FromProduct method to set the new properties from a past product entity and be careful to handle null situations. And the ToProduct method, we can simply set the category ID property, and that should complete the updates we need on the model for now. We do need to make another change though, and this is to the repository code where we retrieve products. When we get all products, we want to use the link include method to also include the related category property in the data that gets retrieved from the database. We're referring to the navigation property that we defined when we added the category to the product entity here. And we can do the same thing when we get a single product by ID. And now that we've got the model updated and are retrieving the right data from the database, we can update the views accordingly. In the index view, I'll copy and paste the name header value and replace the name model property with the new category name one we just added, which should use the display name attribute of simply category. And then in the table rows content, I'll do the same thing to display the category for individual products being listed. In the details view, I'll copy the display name for and display for content for the name property and make the same updates. Now let's run the app and see if we can see the categories on the listing and details views. Here's the listing, and the category column shows up exactly as expected. The display name attribute is being used, and the category values we're seeing look exactly correct. And if we look at the details view for the first product, that is correctly showing the footwear category as well. This is great. So now let's get the create functionality updated. Here's the controller code for the existing functionality to create a product. There's the create method for a GET request that simply returns a view. This will set up an empty form for a product to create. And then there's the post method to actually create a product based on the values that the user has provided, represented by the product model parameter. Let's go have a look at the view for this and think about how we want to add the category property. To save a product with a category, we'll need the category ID value, and we should probably use a drop-down select list with the category names for the user to choose from. I'll paste in some starter code. It's another form group block like all the others. We have a label using the ASP4 tag, so no surprises there. The input element is a select tag, and it's for the category ID value, which is what we need when saving the product to the database. But how to get the available choices here? Ultimately, we should be loading them from the database, but the view should get the available values from the model class. The product model is what we're using for this view. Let's add a list property to the model that we can use here. I'll paste in this new property. It's a list of select list item and will contain the available categories as essentially key value pairs, and it's initialized to empty. So now we can go back to the view and use the ASP-items helper and refer to this new available categories property from the model. To set properties in the model, we use the logic class, but if you recall that controller code we just looked at, the initialization was just to return a view with no model. We need a method that can return a product model with these available categories set. Let's create a new method on the logic interface called initializeProductModel that'll do just that. It'll return a product model with available categories set. In the product logic class, I'll use the implement interface feature to create a starter for the method, which puts it at the bottom of the class, and then I'll paste in the code that will return a new product model with the available categories properties set to the await result of a method that'll get those categories. Then I'll create a placeholder for this new method and paste in the code for it. Since we're not injecting a product context here, but rather the Carved Rock repository, we'll have one more update to make, but we get the categories from the repository, and then we start crafting up the list of select list item that the model will use. The first line adds a none option and sets the key to an empty string. Then we turn the categories from the database into a list of select list items using the name and ID properties, add that list to the one we just started, and return the whole set. Now let's update the repository to be able to get the entire list of categories from the database. Create a new method on the interface called getAllCategoriesAsync, and it'll return a task of a list of category entities. In the repository class, I'll stub out the interface again, find it at the bottom here, and paste in the very simple code to get all of the categories. And I'll update the method to have the async keyword. Then we can go back and look at our new logic method, add the async keyword there as well, and then do the same along with a little cleanup for the initialize product model method. Then, back in the controller code where we just had that return view call for the createGet method, we can set a var for the model to the await result of the logic's initialize product model method, and make the method an async one that returns a task of iActionResult. That should complete the changes. We should have a select list with the categories, and we should be able to save a new product and be able to see the category for the new product when it's been saved. Let's try it out. Here's the app. I'll hit Create New, and the category field is there and it's showing none. And if I click on it, it's showing the footwear and equipment options. Great. Let's choose footwear and provide some values. Then I'll click Create, and the new item and its category shows up in the listing. So these changes worked. The edit method has some minor differences, so let's look at that next. Modifying the edit functionality to support our new category field is just different enough to be interesting here. This is the edit view, and the change we make here is the same as the create view. We're referencing the same model class, so we can just add a form group block with a select input for the category ID field that uses the ASP items helper with the available categories from the model. But if you remember the logic update we made for initializing a product model on create, that didn't look up an existing product model, it just set the available categories property. Let's add a method to the logic that will take a product model and set the available categories on that. Here's the interface for iProductLogic, and we can add a new method to get the available categories for an existing product model and return a task of product model. Then in the product logic class, we can add the implementation for the new method, which will be pretty simple. I'll move this new public method above the private method just to keep things organized here, and then instead of creating a new product model, let's just use the fact that product model is a reference type and update the available categories property right on the input parameter object. Since we're doing that, we don't need to return a product model. We'll just use the one that was passed, and I'll make the same update to the interface method definition. Now let's pop over to the products controller and make sure we set the available categories in the get flavor of the edit method. Here it is, and line 66 is what gets an existing product model based on an ID. So if we find one, let's call our new method to add the available categories to it. That should do the trick, so let's run it and make sure it works. While this is coming up, let me mention to you that the more complex your logic starts to get, the more ways you'll find for doing things. You may want to update some of this code we've created so that you only ever call a single logic method from the controller. Or you may even have other approaches for this. Just keep long-term maintainability and testability in mind as you're making changes and adding features to your code. Okay, here's the app, so let's go into the listing and edit a product. Here's a footwear product, and if I change the category to equipment and then save it, the update shows up in the listing. Great. And if I edit it again and change the category to none, we get a validation error that the category is required. It's working great, so now let's talk about a scenario involving more complex validation.